Right, ladies and gentlemen. Right, ladies and gentlemen, it's Mr. Lawrence, the applicant on Land West of Millbank here. Mr. Lawrence, members are minded not to speak to this application. You are the only speaker. Do you insist on speaking? No? Thank you very much. In that case, I will move the recommendation. I'll take declarations of lobbying first. No, everyone had been lobbied. We knew that. Right. And, right. There is a very brief urgent update, members, but more to the point. Right. Those in favour of the recommendation to grant planning consent with the urgent update. I'm proposing it, by the way, and Councillor Prendergast was seconding it, I think. What's going on? Right, that's everyone. Thank you very much. Yeah, Mr. Bailey, you're not allowed to express incredulity because we agree with ourselves, each other. I'll just allow Councillor Stockwell to take a seat before we start on the next application. Item 13, page 40, Barty House. If the officer would like to introduce that. Barty House is the next one on the list, not Bearsden Football Club. Which page? Page 40.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the extension of the car parking area for this site, which is the Barty House Nursing Home. It's proposed to extend the parking area to the rear part of the site. The proposal will provide 10 additional parking spaces, making a total of 35 on the site. The applicant has confirmed that they do not own all of the land enclosed within the red line boundary, and they have served notice on the owners of the land in accordance with the normal procedure. All of the application site, including the existing and proposed car parking, is located outside the settlement boundary and is classed as being in the open countryside. The site is currently within the special landscape area, but is not included within the draft landscape of local value designation. There is an access track running along the side of the site. There is also the route of public footpath KH131. This first photograph is looking towards the rear of the site. You can see the bank at the back of the site with the retaining wall, and the proposed car parking is in that location. That retaining wall will be moved backwards, and the trees there will be lost. This photograph is slightly further back towards the site, again with the retaining wall. You can see the existing car parking. The existing building is over to the right of that image. This photo is looking along the access track that was previously mentioned towards the main road, and is adjacent to the western site boundary. The application site is over to the left of this photograph with Barty Cottage on the other side. This is further along the access track. Note this existing gap in the trees there. The additional parking will be between the end of the bank and the building that is visible, but would be hidden by this change in level and also increased landscaping in that area. And this is slightly further to the left of the previous photograph, showing a group of trees which are protected by a preservation order. The existing nursing home is visible on the right-hand side. This is an aerial photograph of the site showing the existing car parking, the main road at the bottom left, the access track, and the new parking area would go to the at the end of the existing parking and wrap round the rear part of the building. This shows the existing parking area is to the side of the building, and the proposed parking area is the sort of greyed out area showing the 10 spaces. In terms of the need for parking, the emerging plan refers back to the Kent Parking Standards SPG in terms of residential care homes. The minimum standard for a nursing home is 1 space for every 2 members of staff and 1 space for every 6 residents. In this case, with 61 staff and 59 residents, the minimum level of parking to comply with these standards will be 40 spaces. The current site provides 25 spaces, and the current application will increase this to 35. This shows a cross-section through the rear part of the site, next to the rear of the existing building. It shows the change to the bank, with the existing situation at the top showing the bank, and the image at the bottom shows the cutout of that bank to actually provide sort of level land for the new parking. In terms of landscaping, this plan provides draft details of landscaping. There's also a planning condition with the urgent updates, which would actually seek further details of landscaping. The proposal does include the loss of existing trees. After consultation with the tree officer, these trees are considered to be they're not of a quality which would justify the refusal of planning permission. Whilst the actual parking area will be hidden by the change in level from the footpath, the existing trees do provide some screening of the existing building. As a benefit of this scheme, the applicant provides a line of trees which would fill in the existing gap. In front of the trees, there is a native hedge, which is the first green strip, and then in front of that, ground cover planting. It is the view of officers that the replacement landscaping and the screening provided by the change in level would screen the car parking from the footpath and the countryside. The proposal is in line with current car parking standards, and therefore the officer's recommendation is to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Well, before we proceed any further, I've received a note from Bearsted Parish Council, who did attend a meeting last week to speak to this application. Obviously, it was somewhat unexpectedly deferred to this meeting, so they were unable to attend tonight. They do apologise, and I'm sure members understand that such a late, reallocation of the situation does impose its inconveniences. They did ask me to state that they remain concerned about the intrusion, in their words, of the car park into the open countryside, The issue they raised about ownership has, I believe, been addressed in the introduction of the report. But for members' information, they did reiterate that their statement that they remain opposed to the expansion, I think is a more neutral term, of the car park into the open countryside, and they asked me to apprise members of that fact, which I have now done. I will therefore now call upon Councillor Springett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just prior to my speech, could I just make a comment on the wording in the agenda for clarification, please, which is on page 42, and it refers to policy DM41, amended in main mods, and now policy DM37, allows for the expansion of existing businesses in rural areas, provided there are no significant adverse impact on the rural environment. Can I just point out this is not an expansion of the business. The business is not getting any bigger. So I don't think it actually comes under that policy. Thank you. Members, at strategic planning on Tuesday, we were told that development in the countryside can be easily refused on the basis of the local plan combined with SP17. This is a very minor planning application that looks simple at first glance. However, it masks a much more serious issue that needs to be considered. My main objection is the principle of allowing further development in the countryside. Yes, this may be very small, but part of a field and some mature trees in the existing special landscape area will be lost. It will cross the existing boundary of Bearsted Village and encroach into Thurnham Parish, an ancient boundary just ignored. Last week, modal shift was frequently mentioned as a means of reducing car journeys, congestion and improving air quality. It was highlighted that the inspector wanted us to encourage modal shift. It is a big thread running through the local plan. So here we have an application to extend a car park, which is mostly used by employees, when the property is within a few minutes' walk of a regular bus service, which will eventually stop very close to the nursing home entrance. When combined with the existing train service, we have the perfect opportunity to encourage modal shift. We often hear of the carrot and stick approach to persuading people to change their habits, but here there isn't even a glimpse of a carrot. Now, I fully expect you will improve this minor application, but before you do, please spend a little time discussing it. Please ask yourself if we are serious as a planning authority in preventing the further loss of our countryside, however small. Please ask yourself if we are serious in our attempt to change habits and encourage the use of public transport, or are we going to talk the talk but make no attempt to encourage change? There is already overflow parking available in Roundwell, which, although very rarely used, has the added bonus of reducing vehicle speed. So, if you refuse this application, it should encourage staff to car share, use the bus or train, walk or cycle to work. Overflow parking in Roundwell, if needed, will act as traffic calming, and we are seen to uphold the intent of the local plan and the recommendations of the inspector. Bit of a win-win, really. If you approve it, a little bit more of our open countryside and several mature trees will be lost to development, in contravention of ENV 28, ENV 34 and SP 17. The message we will send out is that we are not practising what we preach. We will not be trying to improve air quality because we accept the loss of mature trees. And we support the use of the car by allowing expansion of a car park when alternatives are readily available. Please spend a few moments to discuss this issue before making your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Springett. That was a very interesting speech. I did enjoy it. Councillor Spooner, as you are one of the ward members, perhaps you would care to...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I accept the apologies of the Parish Council for not being here this evening, and I think that's probably fully justified. They sat through 4 hours on last Thursday and had their application adjourned or deferred. the sad thing is they are objecting to this application, but they don't actually say their reasons for wanting to object. I can't see anything in the report. It just says concerns were expressed. But most importantly, going on to what Councillor Springett has just been saying, I think she's raising quite an interesting point of principle. And, modal shift is something we were lectured about last Tuesday and last Thursday. And it's something I think we're really going to have to get to grips with in the review of the local plan. But I think we're going to have to depend upon more government guidance in how it should be done. And it's going to have a lot of research before we can get any firm policies available to actually enforce it and to restrict developments such as this one we have before us at the moment. I think we need a sense of objectivity and a sense of proportionality here. This is a minor application for 10 car parking spaces. If we don't permit it, there'll be more parking along Roundwell. Okay, it may well slow the traffic down, but it can also create problems. Barty House is a respected business. It provides accommodation for elderly people. It is visited by visitors. It has staff. I think provided we have an adequate landscaping and tree planting scheme, I think the scheme is quite acceptable. I would, however, suggest that with regard to condition 2, that we slightly amend the landscaping condition to require semi-mature trees to be planted along the north-eastern boundary. And that is in deference to the fact that this is a former special landscape area. It is encroaching into the countryside, and the trees that have come down were subject to a TPO. So I think we should be quite entitled to ask for those. And I'd like to hear what other members have to say, but I'm quite happy to move the application be approved. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Spooner. I thought you were going in the spirit of things and actually going to propose some transport amendments, like a couple of Segway spaces or something environmentally sustainable. Apologies. You've made a suggestion about amending the landscape condition. And ask the officers a view on that.
Yes, I don't see a problem with that. None of the trees to be lost are subject to TPO. They're the trees in the lower down in the image shown here. The planning condition has the second planning condition is changed as part of the urgent updates, but I don't see a problem with including semi-mature trees in as part of that condition. No, that's. Yeah.
Yes, I think that the answer is yes, subject to checking with the landscape officer on the survivability of the particular species. Councillor Stockwell, I think you seconded the...
I was just seconding the application, the approval rather. I don't think I've got anything else to add. It's not a hugely significant thing. It's not going to do demonstrable harm, so I'm happy to support that.
You, Councillor Stockwell, you remind me of Councillor Ellis of what else was Ian, who always said no demonstrable harm. Councillor Harwood, I wasn't sure, are you indicating or not? Councillor Harwood.
Thank you. Though I am very sympathetic to one of the ward councillors' concerns, unfortunately we have to accord with a development plan, and ever since we adopted KCC's parking standards, I don't think we should have, and I always still against them. I think we're not going to uphold a refusal. However, from two very practical things, there is an amendment condition 2 within our scene urgent update, and the trees and shrubs, well, especially the shrub species proposed, that's lifted from our landscape and character assessment guidance 2000. But the species list that's provided is very specifically the one for the Len and Lilk Valley, and they're essentially species for wet ground. I think probably at a push, most of those species will survive, but sweetgale will not. Sweetgale likes its feet wet, and that bank is sandy and arid and dry. So therefore, I would, with the movers and seconders' indulgence, request that we remove the last shrub species in the list, sweetgale, because it just won't survive, and you'll just have a gap in your hedge and whatever. So that was one thing. And for Councillor Spooner's point around the size of the stock, I am a bit concerned because of the topography here and the underlying geology, that if you put a tree that hasn't got a well-developed root system, you're going to have a lot of failures. I suggest that actually put a smaller tree in that can develop its own roots and doesn't have the strain of a big tree to feed. It will outstrip the growth in no time. And because, yes, there are some long views from the north, actually, it's not. I don't think you need an instant impact. I think what you need is an impact in time. And I would counsel that perhaps just standard trees, given 5 years, will be bigger and probably more alive than heavy standards. Of the tree species that are proposed here, some of them are very tough. I mean, the small-leaf lime and field maple will tend to survive whatever. Oaks are certainly a lot more temperamental, but I think a scheme can be put in. But I would counsel that smaller stock would in time outstrip bigger stock.
Councillor Spooner, you've heard some, shall we say, some contradictory advice to you. Were you willing to accept it?
I bow to the wiser counsel of those that know better about trees than I do, and I'm sure the tree officer will have some comments to make as well.
Okay, right, fine. We duly amend that recommendation accordingly. Councillor Powell, you did indicate a...
Yes, and I shall be to the contrary as well. I mean, one of the things that sometimes confuses me, in fact I'll say that about all the applications that I speak on, is that the application, we've got boundaries. A boundary is a boundary. A boundary is a line you do not cross. So we're not talking about 10 car parking spaces tonight. We're actually talking about a boundary, an encroachment into the local countryside. My point one of the 2 points I would like to make is certainly if we give an agreement to this particular application, which I sincerely hope we don't, this would set a precedent for other areas where we can start crossing boundaries. In fact, is it really worth having the word boundary mentioned on any of our planning applications if this one should go through? So I'm not talking about 10 car parking spaces, I'm just talking about a boundary. And so I will be proposing an amendment that we refuse this application. Thank you.
Sorry, we've had this discussion before. We cannot run a planning committee at all if we take that position, which we've had that discussion before. We'll inquire further into this, but for 40 years we've been doing it this way, and I intend to continue.
What's the proposed amendment?
Right, but before I do anything else, I'm going to explore whether or not it's valid, because we need to hear the grounds. And it may not be, but we have to hear what the grounds for refusal would be.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. Now, the grounds for refusal is quite simple. It will be an encroachment, that this application will be an encroachment into the open countryside. So that's why I propose that we refuse it. And the harm that it will cause when it's encroaching on the countryside. Don't ask me and again, because
Well, I assume you mean visual impact, but so,
Yeah.
Councillor Clark.
Okay.
I just wanted to. I thought you said you were asking a question. If you're not, I'm going to have to take the seconder first. Fair point, Councillor Prendergast. I thought he said he was asking a question. He was not. So it's your turn.
Well, I'm glad there was no other reason. I have to thank Councillor Springett for a very spirited representation there. It was, yes, heartfelt. I know Councillor Spooner has described it as a modest development, but nonetheless it is intrusion into the countryside. So I do support what Councillor Powell is saying in terms of the impacts on SB17. But also, I'm very conscious, last week when we were talking about the Sutton Road applications and the head of planning was here, he was asked a question about how we were going to address traffic congestion, and he used two words, just two simple words. He said, modal shift. Well, if we can apply it to those developments, we should certainly be thinking about applying it to this application. And I certainly think, and I'm sure you'll help us find grounds on that one, Mr. Bailey, that we could perhaps write that into the grounds for refusal. Thank you.
Take Councillor Clark and then Councillor Mumford, and then we'll come back. So.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to, in terms of balance, this is a very small application. In terms of harm, the topography of the site is such that the harm is very minimal, so I don't think this is going to open up a precedent that's going to allow 240 houses on a similar area of open countryside. But I also think that we're not just creating a very minimal level of harm, we're also bringing about quite a bit of benefit by taking down a bunch of Leylandis or whatever they are and actually putting in some native species. I think we are actually benefiting the open countryside at this point. We've got these sort of thuggish looking fir trees and we're looking to actually improve the wildlife in the area. I think I don't see there being significant harm from this proposal.
Trust me, I've always thought that there should be a planning policy calling for the removal of Leylandi wherever they exist, but horrible things. But Councillor Mumford.
Just one thing, it's just if we're going to make a stand, having experienced old people's homes, not as a resident, as a visitor, I think the parking generally is inadequate, the provision is inadequate. When you start considering that we've got the families, we've got chiropodists, we've got doctors, we've got hairdressers, all go there, it's normally inadequate. You end up with people on the road. Yeah, there is a principle, but I don't think this is the application to apply it, in my opinion.
I can ask Mr Bailey to come back, then Councillor Cox, and then we shall move to a conclusion.
I'll be quite simple. Each application on its merits, you have to demonstrate harm. I've said it so many times. Just across the road, you've got a housing allocation for 110 units. I just can't see where the harm is. This is settled down behind a bank. You've got landscaping coming forward. I get each application on its merits, but I haven't heard anyone saying harm. I would also add what MPPF says about paragraph 28. Promote the retention and development of local services and community facilities in villages. Well, this is a community facility. It says promote and support it. You've got other policies that seek to do it. And let's not forget nursing homes. Last time I realised they work shifts. So I don't know in terms of the night-time bus services, but if this car park is for services, then from my recollection, in terms of sustainability, to answer Councillor Prendergast, because I know she'll come back to me, my understanding is that in terms of these facilities work night shifts and they need various forms of transport. So just relying on modal shift is not, in my view, the way that you would be able to justify a refusal on this application. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Cox and then...
Very quick one, really. When we were being given the figures
I think even with this 10, they're still underneath the amount that they really should have. So I think we are lucky that they've been able to find an area to just put 10. This is a community facility here. People can walk if they choose to. Maybe people who haven't got cars will be using the bus, but perhaps they'll only be able to pull the shifts they need. We can't be doing with this. Let's just get on and vote, please.
I will allow the proposers of the putative amendment to come back briefly with... Oh, sorry, Councillor Round, you hadn't spoken already, so I will take you first.
I just wanted to remind people that if we are looking at the new local plan, DM23 actually states new developments should ensure the proposals incorporate electric vehicle charging infrastructure.
That's a very interesting point. So is there any chance of a parking space for an electric vehicle? Right, have we got an answer on electric vehicles point?
Yes, we can add a further condition which asks for a number of charging points. Normally with residential it's one per unit. So I'd say one charging point because it's 10 spaces.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Thank you for your suggestion, Councillor Rand. Right, coming back to the possible amendment to see whether there is any further development of the argument.
So I was thinking of that word boundary, Mr. Chairman. I can't get it out of my head.
Yeah, Councillor Prendergast. Okay, I have to say, at this point, then, I don't think we've had an arguable ground of refusal put forward, so we're back with the main motion. Councillor Spooner, can I just check you're not pursuing the point about semi-mature trees, given the advice from Councillor Harwood, who some of whose best friends are trees?
Ideally, I would like to see some immature trees there, and I would like the landscape officer to perhaps comment upon that and provide the appropriate advice.
Okay, then I propose that what you say should be delegated authority to the landscape officer to check out the most appropriate age and standard to be applied.
I'm quite happy with that. Yeah.
So head of planning to work with the landscape officer, sorry. Yeah. Is that all right with the seconder? Mr. Stockel, is that okay? Okay. Okay, just checking. Yes, just checking. Thank you very much. Those in favour? It's not. It's actually the recommendation, but that the condition be on landscaping condition 2, I believe it was, be reworded to consult, to delegated authority to the head of planning in consultation with the landscape officer to check what standard of tree and to amend the species list as proposed by Councillor Harwood to remove sweet gale from the list.
As well, we're on that, does Councillor Harwood want to... Does Councillor Harwood wish to be more specific on the second paragraph, replacement trees and those species listed there?
So, yeah, if I come back, I mean, from that list, I think the list is fine. It's just the only one that we need to remove is sweet gale from the shrub list, because that just won't prosper.
Thank you very much, members. Thank you for the clarification, Councillor Harwood. Those in declarations lobbying before I move to the vote. I forgot that. I apologise.
So, Chair, we have the amendment to vote on.
Yeah, I just said I didn't take declarations of lobbying on this application. Has anyone been lobbied? No. Brilliant. That's why I didn't do it, because I subconsciously knew no one had. Right. Okay. Those in favour of the application as motion as reworded?
Sorry, we have an amendment to deal with.
No, we haven't. The amendment falls.
It's been withdrawn.
The amendment falls. There was no grounds for refusal put forward.
Well, it needs to be withdrawn or voted on.
Well, there was no grounds of refusal put forward that would stack up. The procedures of this committee state quite clearly that there should be grounds of refusal put forward. That at least a ground of refusal, and no ground of refusal was put forward. No, no ground of refusal was put forward because no argument was made. An assertion of a policy in itself is not a ground of refusal. It isn't. So it doesn't go to the vote because it is not a viable amendment under this council's own rules. It's a requirement to put a ground of refusal, and that was not a ground of refusal.
Mr. Chairman, can I just have a clarification on that? Because I actually mentioned encroachment into the open countryside causing harm. Is that not? That's not grounds?
No.
No. Okay.
Is that clear? So that we move to, so the amendment falls. We move back to the motion, which was to grant, as amended, condition 2. Those in favour? Those against? Abstentions? Thank you. Right. We now move to item 14, page 47.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application by Bearsted Football Club to allow an extra 1 month's use between first...
Before we go, be it noted that Councillor Harwood has left the chamber and cannot now participate in this application. Sorry, now proceed.
Okay. I'll start again. Just refer members to the urgent updates, obviously the previously seen urgent updates, which contain the appeal decision which granted planning permission for use of the floodlights and the stands. So that's very relevant to this application, and you've got the inspector's decision notice and the conditions attached. So this is an application to allow an extra 1 month's use. So effectively, it's currently... it can't be used between 1st of May and 31st of September. What they're proposing to do is bring that a month forward to the 31st of August. So it's an extra 1 month's use between that time. So they can start using it on the 31st of August if they get approval. And to allow an extra hour in the evening from 1500 hours to 22:30, currently allowed to 21:30. So it gives them an extra hour in the evening on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, with no other change to the other operating times. Hopefully members are clear on that before I proceed. So, site location plan. You'll know the site probably particularly well in its own right, and the fact that it was quite a contentious application to the west of the site, which is land north of Bicknor Wood. So most of you will know it, which was last Thursday's meeting. In terms of the main pitch area, so you've got a public right-of-way down here, which links down and carries on further down here. I've got further plans that show you TPO plans of the site. You've got the main pitch area here. This is the practice area, again here. Numerous, I think there's 2 pitches set out here, and you've also got another practice area in this location, and that has got an older consent in terms of on floodlighting. So the main floodlighting is in this area, and this is what this application is about. You'll notice the red line only relates to this area and doesn't relate to the area as the practice pitch. This just shows you an aerial view, shows the TPOs on the site, and you've obviously got the ancient woodland over here, but this shows TPO areas, and obviously you've got the access road down here, and you've got the parking area within the sort of woodland area. So this is a view of the floodlighting looking south. In terms of where you've got it, Honey Lane is just behind you, so it's behind the photographer. There is a hedge behind here, and I've got a photograph through that. So this is looking to the practice area that's not part of the application. These are the floodlights that they're seeking an extension of time in terms of the operation for the extra month and the extra hour in the evening on those days I've already mentioned. And then as we pan round on the rest of the photographs, you'll see that's the other practice area. So this is just moved, this is looking southwest. Again, this area in the foreground is not part of the scheme. It's these floodlights here. This is just showing as you move around. So you've got the access, the public right-of-way down this road. These trees are TPO'd. And this is the practice area that I said has its own floodlights here, which are not part of the consent that was granted by the planning inspector on appeal. This is a view through the hedge of housing in Honey Lane, I think one of the rare gaps that you'll see in that hedgerow, but that looks towards the floodlighting, so it just gives you approximation of distance from those houses which are on the opposite side of Honey Lane, which are the closest to this application site. It gives you a sort of a view and a perspective of distance. This is the area looking east across the pitch area. This is the area I've referred to again, so, excuse me. So this area is not part of the application, it's part of the practice. This is the main pitch area, and this is the sort of the practice area that has those additional lights which are hidden sort of under the TPO trees over in this cordon area here. Same similar view from the practice pitch, again just moving around. This is the practice area again, which has its lighting off here. It's not lit by these floodlights, it's a separate practice area. And again, just giving you another example back looking towards Honey Lane, which is over there. Just gives you a proximity of distance and the distance you're seeing, because obviously there is the issue of light pollution that needs to be considered by members. So in terms of the principal issues to consider, they are set out in the report and relate to an extension of 1 month for when the floodlighting can be used, so an extension of condition 3, and the extension of 1 hour's use on the Tuesday, Wednesdays and Thursdays during the periods the floodlights are permitted to be used. So that's an hour extension in the evening. The report concludes that the extended times of operation for the floodlighting will not have a significant impact on the countryside character or the residential amenity, above and beyond which currently occurs on the site, with limited impact on ecology in the locality, which needs to be balanced against the benefits of promoting sport and leisure use. Paragraph 28 of the MPPF again does support and promote the retention of local services and community facilities, and also supports sustainable rural tourism and leisure developments that benefit businesses in rural areas, communities and visitors. So in terms of the issue, the planning inspector granted consents for the use of these lights. This application seeks to extend it for the periods I've already said, and on that basis the application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the first speaker, if he's still here, but I cannot see him, is Mr. Scannell for the applicant, but he's not here, so I assume he's not intending to speak. I also don't see Councillor Moon from Otham Parish Council. So that brings us to Councillor Newton.
Thank you very much for this one. This is for a change of conditions. We did this particular site it was agreed that the planning inspector agreed the use of it from 1500 hours to 21:30, 9:30 at night. And the floodlights are not to be used from May till August. Well, that's common sense then, because it's daylight. The problem is with it is the noise that comes from football, the abusive language that is affecting 192 residents that live in 3 T's, Honey Lane, Simmons Lane, Whitehorse Lane, Autumn Lane. And, you know, we can't ignore that. There are only 362 residents in Autumn. And we're getting hammered here with the number of hours increased to 22:30, 10:30 at night, to have floodlights and potential football games being played. And there's only access to this site is through country lanes. The planning inspector, in the previous application, actually referred to them being country lanes in a rural area. Now, that's interesting. The other thing that's happened here is that the owner of this site has actually cut down TPO trees that have never been replaced. I have photo. If you can, would you mind putting back on the site from above, please? That's it. There's an area there called Belks Wood, which is next door to land north of Bicknor Wood. When that is viewed from the air, there's a large number of TPO trees that have disappeared, and that area is being used for car parking. There was no application to take them down, so why were they removed? The fact is that the residents of Autumn have basically had enough of the late night noise that is generated by this site, the abusive language that goes on with football matches. It's unfair, and there is harm to the countryside here. There's harm to TPO trees, they're gone, and yet nobody's bothered about it. But the thing is, when this last appeal was granted, the land north of Bicknor Wood had that big field there, had no houses on it. Now you're going to have another 240 odd houses there, right next door to this site. So that is going to have a serious generation of complaints. This site, I have more complaints than any other.
I'm going to have to stop you.
That's fine. I just hope you listen to me.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Tempted to ask Councillor Bolton whether he has any particular comments on the site, because I believe he used to referee the odd football match.
Used to, and sometimes still do referee there. So, and I have been lobbied on this as well. The context of this application is quite interesting because it comes out of a change in the footballing calendar, in particular the non-league pyramid calendar implemented at the start of the season, which is basically to front-load games at the start of the season, i.e. in August and September, because of the deterioration of pitches throughout December, January, February time. You'd end up with teams having a massive backlog in April and May, and often the season would be extended into June, which is, of course, not acceptable. The issue is, and I note Councillor Newton's comments in the papers as well about bringing the kick-off time forward, is that the Laws of Association Football, Law 7, refers to the duration of the match, which of course has to be 90 minutes, 2 halves of 45 minutes with a 15 minutes half-time break as well. And it also gives stipulation that competition rules, such as the league that Bearsted Football Club play, do override that as to the time that the actual match kicks off. And the league Bearsted plays states very clearly that matches should kick off at 7:45 p.m. The reason being, it's a relatively high standard of football in amateur. It's almost semi-pro, step 5 and non-league pyramid. So it is a decent standard of football here. Consequently, you end up with teams travelling afar, referees travelling afar, and so on and so forth, just to get to the match. So the idea that we'd be able to bring the kick-off time forward, I think, is very difficult from a practical perspective. Therefore, working from a 7:45 kick-off, the match should technically finish at 9:30 p.m. for 2 45-minute halves, plus 15 minutes for half-time. But, of course, as matches are being front-loaded at the start of the season, that includes cup matches as well, of which you get 30 minutes of extra time and a penalty shootout. So that's the context behind the history of this application from the club's perspective, and that's why we're here. And that's, I suspect, why we're only considering it into September and not beyond into October as well, because the time, September is where the biggest impact has been. As a result, it's really, the problem with this pitch as well being grass is it's only going to be used once in the week, so not on a Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, just on either a Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday, otherwise the pitch won't be good enough. Therefore, in reality, we're talking about an extension of time for 4 hours of the year, potentially 4 midweeks in September, possibly. So my concern from a planning perspective, bearing all of that in mind, and obviously the report we've got in front of us, is I see it being I don't think that extension is reasonable enough for us to refuse this application, albeit I understand the concerns that residents have, and of course the distance of the floodlit pitch from residential properties too. Of course, abusive language does take place at football match, and some referees should, by the laws of the game, stamp that out. So that shouldn't happen, but of course it does, to be honest, as well. So I can understand absolutely where the residents are coming from, but I do think this council, as James said earlier, has an obligation to support Bearsted Football Club. They're the second biggest football team in the borough after Maidstone United as well, and we do want to see them progress up the non-league pyramid as far as they go. So I personally find it quite difficult to be in a position to refuse this application, considering how little actually we're planning on increasing the time by. This is just 1 hour for 1 hour for a month of the year, which will be no more than 4 hours a year.
I think we might want to return to clarify that later, because I'm told that may not be true. Right. Right. Now, there isn't. I don't believe there's an urgent update. Yes, there is. There's a very short urgent update of one line. It says the appendix. The appendix wasn't attached, and the appeal decision is attached to it. So it's depending on how you look at it, it's an urgent update of 1 line or 4 pages, depending on how you look at it. It attaches the previous appeal decision. Yes. Have we had any lobbying on this application? Councillor Bolton, myself, Councillor Powell, anyone else? Okay. Right. Anyone else wishing to speak? Councillor Mumford.
I listened to Councillor Newton, and obviously the TPO trees is an enforcement issue and whatever that results in. But my concern is the amenity of the residents in that area and the potential residents in that area. I must admit, I don't know it that well. I don't know the football ground that well. Maybe the officer could elaborate on how many neighbours because I think we've got to stick to light, because that's what we'll be looking at, and not noise. I'm not sure. I think it will be light, and what is the effect?
Before we go any further, I may be completely wrong here, but I'm a legal officer who have read this as the application being extended for the permission being extended for an additional month, which I think is fairly unproblematic, but the hours are being proposed to extend throughout the year. And now, that in practice, Mr. Bolton, that may be different, but of course the consent is. Have we got that wrong?
Yes.
I think we need.
Yes.
That's not what that says.
What? If we go, let me take you back to what the inspector actually granted.
Yes.
on the consent. So let's go to condition 3. It says the floodlighting shall not be used between the 1st of May and the 30th of September. What the applicants are proposing is to bring that 30th of September forward to the August, so it allows them to use. Yeah, so it allows them to use the lighting. Then it goes condition 4, the floodlighting. So we've now got an extra month, and now we're not going for a year throughout the whole year use. We're going for the floodlighting can be used for an extended hour up to 22:30 during the periods that the floodlighting can be used as set by condition 3. So it's not, you don't need floodlighting during winter, during summer months.
No.
Hopefully that's clear, members.
No, what Councillor Bolton said was it was an additional 4 hours per year, right? And it's not, which is what I and a legal officer just said, and then Councillor Bailey, Mr. Bailey disagreed with me and then said what we said. So yes, I think you did, yeah. Right. Now, Councillor Mumford, we'll come to you, Councillor Clark, now.
I was involved in the YMCA application some years ago, and when the lights were installed, we had a lot of problems with residents having tremendous amount of lighting falling on their houses. And officers at Maidstone Borough Council had said that the application and the installation was appropriate, and the developer had put forward their own readings, and essentially they wanted everything to be signed off. But we actually paid for our own lighting consultant to come out and test the various. He put a light meter in the middle of the windows in the sort of in the reception rooms of the various houses, and we found that the lighting levels were above statutory nuisance levels, which led to the planning office to go back to the developer and ultimately have guards put onto the back of the lights, because the real impact is the overspill from behind the lights. If you can aim it to the ground, it's one thing, but it's really, if you can see the filament from anywhere and it's close by, then that you've got a serious chance of that being above statutory nuisance levels. So I wonder, given that they're looking for something quite how can I say, they're extending things quite by some level, perhaps we could consider looking into whether you can get these optional, because it was optional at the case with YMCA, screens that can be put onto the back of the lights that could potentially reduce the lighting for residents, and that might actually give them a better outlook in the overall scheme of things, to take that sort of point source of light that spills out towards the houses away.
Well, we'll come to that shortly, but I'll take Councillor Cox first before the officer comes.
Thank you, as I was before Councillor Clark, but that's fine. What I would like to... Yes. When I was too going to bring up the YMCA, because I think what we would then, if this goes through, if we're minded to approve, the next thing will be them coming back and say, they're not going off at 10:30 because people are going to vacate the site. So we've got to have some light on the site, so therefore it's going to go on, and it's going to just casually... We need to have some timers on these and some shuttering around the lights to stop overspill, not only for the residents but for the wildlife in the near woods. And seeing as Tony isn't here, I thought I'd add that bit.
Yes, although with planning applications, we do have to assume that unless contrary evidence is presented that people are going to stick to the conditions. We can't assume they're not going to. Mr. Bailey.
Yeah, I see what members are trying to say. The issue that you have is that the lights can go on and you have no control under this application for the light columns. So you couldn't require any baffles, because that's what they're called, to be put on those existing lights for the existing hours of operation. You just have no control of it because they can do it under the previous inspector's condition. So you have to bear in mind that, accepting it was in 2011, those houses haven't increased or come any closer, these houses, accepting that, because they haven't moved, accepting that, and I put on that proposal because obviously someone referred to it, this is the plan for land north of Bicknor Wood. And I'm sure you will appreciate what is right down that column, which is a 40-plus metre, very strong landscape buffer as already existing. So in order for the lights to penetrate across the footpath, which has got a line of TPO trees, which is very high already, you've got to penetrate through that area. I'm not trying to say, I'm just trying to address issues that have previously been raised on here. So on that point, I don't think there is going to be a light penetration issue going through to the new residents of this existing, or the development that came forward. So in terms of the control, members can only control the hours of this application. So if you then decided to say you would only allow permission if they put baffles up, you could only put them on during that particular time, and I'd have to turn around to say, does that meet the enforceable tests and is it reasonable? I would say, no, it's not.
Why not? Absolutely, of course.
That didn't make sense to me about the tree canopy, because we're looking at extending and lighting during winter months when there are no leaves on the trees. So can we start again on that one, because that really didn't make sense. Sorry.
I think it's a very fair point. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, if I'd have known I could have interjected, I would have. What I'd like to say is, yeah, exactly. What I'd like to say is, we're looking at this once again just about this site and this application. I agree. But if we're saying we can't affect a timer so that it does go off at the time that's going to be on here, and we can't put any baffles on because there's no light, you're saying direct light. Well, all you've got to do is look at Maidstone Stadium, which actually gives daylight to the people near it, and from me in College Road, which is half a mile away, it looks like it's sunset. So I'm afraid direct light, which is what you're saying, may not affect it. But the umbra that is all around is, Mr. Bailey. And I think if you're saying we can't affect a timer and we can't affect baffles, then we should refuse it.
On that note, I'm sure Councillor Powell would like to add to that.
Well, as a very keen football fan, and I've been involved in football clubs before, this is a very, very difficult situation, because we're talking about the aspirations of Bearsted Football Club, and there are now a full member of the Football Association, which allows them to appear in the FA Cup, and whilst I don't expect them to be playing kind of Arsenal, Tottenham, Manchester United in coming years, who knows, yeah. There are a couple of football clubs in Scotland which have exactly similar problems, and because of that, they actually bring their kick-off times forward. Now, most senior football clubs do only play once during the middle of the week. I don't know what time Bearsted Football Club kick off their games. I would imagine it's probably 7:45. Is there any way that we can talk to them to ask them whether they can bring that kick-off time forward to 7:30 or even possibly 7:15? Equally, there isn't that many games that actually finish after, I'm going to say, 9:50. With the massive crowds that Bearsted get to disperse the 80 to 100 supporters tops, it's going to take them 5 minutes to get away, unless they all pile into the clubhouse afterwards, and then they're taking it at their own risk. So what I'm suggesting is that we maybe enter into dialogue with Bearsted to find out exactly what they can do to alleviate the problem that we've got.
I think Councillor Bolton, I'll bring you back in a minute, Matt, did actually say that the problem isn't, in that respect, is not that we'd have to have a dialogue with Bearsted Football Club, but that they are somewhat constrained by the league rules. So that if we were going to do that, we'd actually have to talk to the league rather than to Bearsted Football Club. I think we'd probably get further. We're trying to find some means of control of the illumination than we would trying to get the League to change their mind. I have to say, on the illumination, it may be true that there's limited effect to the land north of Bicknor Farm and the new residents, but we mustn't forget the effect on the actual woodland itself in ecological terms. Now, the more disruption, the more hours that you have, and the shorter the night, the more it's not a simple, straightforward thing. But the more disruption there is, and the shorter the night, the more damage in ecological terms. So I'm not saying that it's a simple, straight yes/no, but don't forget there is that potential damage to the ecology and not just residents. Councillor Mumford.
Again, it's an inquiry with the officers. We're talking here about baffles and timing, etc., and neighbours' amenity and maybe nature. Would it be a job for enforcement if that found to be that there was a light pollution problem, and would enforcement have that power to include what we're asking for here?
Yes, in a moment, but I'm going to take Councillor Prendergast first because it may bear on that.
I'm going to be very quick. I think I don't want to say anything about the aspirations and the achievements of anything negative, because I think it's laudable. But I am concerned about the residential amenity, the light till that point. And obviously, as a result of their success, we're going to see more people visiting the ground. And I know the inspector has made reference to that. But where is the parking? You know, there are other issues that we need to consider, and I almost feel like we haven't got enough detail here. You know, there are lots of questions being asked about light over there. I'm worried about it. I just think we need a little bit more information here before we can come to a decision on this. I'm suggesting a deferral.
It is a floodlighting application at the moment. Councillor Clark, please.
If that's a proposal, I will second it, because I think that when I looked at this, when I looked at the papers for this and I looked at the reports, there was no lighting report. Now, this is a lighting application, and going back to when we got an expert in to look at the light levels, I think it cost us £235 to get that report, admittedly some years ago. Why do we not consider deferring and requesting that there be a light report appropriate for the site, and then that comes back to us for review?
Right, that's an interesting proposal. Mr. Bailey, I think it's time to bring you back now.
The issue that the lighting report, if that's what members decide to defer it on, would only be able to consider that extra hour in the evening. So you'd have absolutely no control on the operation from 1500 to 2100. You wouldn't be able to touch that. You would only be able to look at the issue for that extra hour. So that's what, if members ask for that, you would have to consider it. And even if it came back, because the report, then you would have to consider what the impact of the lighting up to 2100 is. And if there's no difference between 2100 to 2200, you're back into the same position that you're at now. So I'm just advising, if you did go down that route, the applicant may do it, may not do it, but you'd have to consider what the impact is on its lawful use and what the difference is between this additional hour in terms of light activity. I'm not a light expert, but I don't know if there'd be a lot of difference between 2100s on impact on light and 2200s, because the light would be extended during the night, but it would still be the same intensity and still from the same light source. What members could, if they decided to do, is to defer it for what the impact of the additional extended hours would be on the impact of ecology. Because if you've got the inspector's report in front of you, members will probably note that the reasons why it was imposed in the first place was for bats. So if you consider that there isn't enough information to determine what the impact on bat activity from the additional hour is, that's probably a reasonable ground to defer it on. But I would suggest it's not reasonable to require investigation of baffles for that extra hour and for timers, because they would have to switch them off anyway at 9:30 under their lawful consent. And to answer Councillor Mumford's request, enforcement, if they went over that time, we would have potential looks at breach of condition notices and everything else. Environmental health deal with light pollution. That would be under separate legislation, not controlled by us. But my feeling is if this has been approved for that particular time at 2100 or 22, then I don't think environmental health would be able to engage. But as I said, I'm not a health and I don't know environmental health legislation. It's dealt with under their own part of the Act, and we don't sort of mix the two together.
Okay, Councillor Clark, very quickly, then I'll take Councillor Round.
If I could just come back. I think you're right. I think in terms of light fall off, we probably won't. There probably aren't nuisance levels in the areas around, but it's just something that I was thinking earlier we should consider, given that obviously they're looking for more light at the site. But I do take the Chairman's point about the impact of the ancient woodland. This is an area where there is sensitive ecology, and we have nothing to go on. We can surmise what may or may be the impact of an extra hour, but we're only guessing, and I don't think we really do have all the information to make a decision.
Okay, thank you very much. I must take Councillor Round.
My point was actually, despite the fact that Mr Bailey has given Councillor Mumford a reply, my view, I may be wrong in this, my view is that environmental health would actually have even more power on the basis that if we take Councillor Newton seriously, whilst it's not particularly a planning consideration, noise is. And if there is felt to be further environmental harm, then that is significant to the residential amenity. So I think there is something that we need to look further at there.
That may be an issue that arises in due course. I take your point, Mr Bailey. The issue would be if a noise nuisance that reached statutory nuisance levels occurred, and that would be an environmental health case rather than a planning enforcement case, clearly, and that would be where we're talking about. It seems to me at this stage the piece of information we're clearly lacking is an ecological report in terms of the assessment of the extra hour on ecology, particularly bats, but not necessarily just bats, so that we have no information whatsoever to go on, and I really do need some. So? And the extra month is the key. Yes, and the extra month as well, of course, not just the extra hours. I do not know whether that is significant, but that in itself is a reason for deferral, because I don't know whether it's significant or not. So I will propose that we defer for that information. Councillor Mumford seconding. Those in favour? So,
can we get the wording? Absolutely.
Right. The wording is... Right. Yes.
Oh, okay.
By all means, read out what you have, Mr Bailey. I'm profoundly interested. Okay. Go for it.
I think there's something we need to add on to it, but that the application be deferred to consider the impact of the additional hours on ecology, specifically bats. I think I need to put something there about the month as well.
Yes, the legal officer did suggest, and I did say, but I can see how you missed it because I added it at the end.
Yes,
that
so
we also need to consider the impact of the extra month as well as the extra hour.
So additional hours and month on ecology specifically.
Yeah, thank you. I did pick it up, but it was right at the end, so thank you very much for that. Right, I'll take that vote again because obviously Mr Bailey quite rightly corrected me. All those in favour of the deferral for the reasons set out? That's everyone. Thank you very much.
Just for the record, who seconded it?
Councillor Mumford. Councillor Cox.
If I may, last week when we were looking at the 3 sites in Ottham, or 2 sites near Ottham, we were looking for a community building that could be turned into more of a community building, and we were talking about a sports facility that may just take some investment. And looking at this and where it's placed, I think it would be a very good place to look at it becoming more of a multi-function, and therefore, if involvement from the community, seeing it as more of a everybody's using it, not just sports, it could be looked upon as a more involved place to be, and not just looked at very loud people being abusive and playing football. It's just an idea. I was going to say that before I raised all my other projections.
That was something that may be brought up, but it's hardly appropriate to make it I take note of what you're saying, but I think there may be, you know, more to the argument than that. Councillor Bolton.
I think there is, because thinking of the site, it's not actually very big. You'd either, if you were to put such builds in there, you'd either have to eat into ancient woodland or existing sports pitches, which would get an objection either way. But in principle, it's a good idea. But I think.
Members, I don't think we should be pursuing this too much without, you know, some engagement from Otten first. Councillor Mumford.
Yes, when we approved that, we did put the proviso that the parish council would be involved in that, and I think we should leave those kind of choices to the parish council.
The point is noted, but there is a process been established, and the parish council and ward members are the people who should be, you know, front and centre with this. Right, we move on to appeal decisions. I'm sure that Councillor Prendergast is delighted at the decision number 2 and in relation to Fulham Farm. And it's interesting to note the other decision for residential development in Staplehurst, 33 dwellings, which is interesting. The dismissal of the appeal there. So, some good news. Any comments or questions on those appeals? Congratulations to the officers and members involved in those appeal hearings and the decisions. You'll be glad to hear there are no urgent chairman's announcements of any kind this evening. I would accept to say thank you, members and officers, for your patience in which has been an extremely extended and difficult meeting over 2 weeks. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.